To our webinar. This is NDE, NILA, and CLTA K-12 Spring Guest Speaker Series. And today we have Danielle, our NILA president today, to present practical methods for increasing target language use for teachers and students. I'm super excited. I remember it's a lot of learning for me when I started to teach Chinese at Central High School. Either my students couldn't understand me or I couldn't stay in target language. It's a lot of learning. Thanks for doing this webinar for us, Danielle. And please take, here's a little bit about Danielle. I'm going to allow you yourself to introduce your, I'm going to ask yourself to introduce yourself. I'm sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm Danielle Fulcher. I'm the 2024 NILA president. I currently teach Spanish at Lincoln Northwest High School. This year it's Spanish 1 and 2. Next year it'll be AP and another couple levels of Spanish. And I've worked with Crystal for the last several years, and I'm super excited for this series. We've got a lot of great people out there.
Thank you for being so supportive. I really appreciate that. You helped me so much. Thank you, Danielle. Before we get started, I want to let you know that our Nebraska What Language Week is coming, and we are going to have 4 wonderful webinars. And the first one is promoting language, what language through immersion and a competitive experience, And it's going to be presented by Kara Heminger, as our president of French Language Teacher Association. And also Dr. Catalano from UNO is going to present translanguaging in what language classroom. And also our anthropologist, Barbara Boots, are going to present why should K-12 language programs include American Indian languages. Then on Saturday, February 24th, Dr. Moeller and Dr. Ziegler are going to present Advocate for Languages for All. So please consider, pick your favorite. And I'm not asking everybody to come for 4, but there might be a favorite one. Please join us online. Okay. Thank you very much for coming. And Danielle, it's all yours.
Sounds good. Okay. I will go ahead and share my screen with you, and we can go ahead and get started. Okay. So thank you all for being here on this Saturday morning. For today, the topic of my presentation is maximizing your target language use. Now, if you'd like to join, there is a bit.ly code, or there is also a QR code to have a copy of this presentation handy. And there is a little bit of interaction with it, so make sure you go ahead and grab those codes. And actually, I will go ahead and, let's see, I will put the link to, actually, not yet, sorry, one of the links later on in the presentation. Okay, so just a little bit about me. Like I said, I teach at Lincoln Northwest in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I have my contact information there. If you have any follow-up questions or would like to reach out, I'm a huge fan of collaboration, so please don't hesitate to contact me. And I've kind of separated my presentation into 4 different parts. The main thing is the gap between theory and practice. And we're going to kind of first take a look at some of the obstacles that prevent us from getting to actuals 90% in the target language each day in the classroom. And then I'll kind of go through a few sets of things that you can do as the teacher to up your target language, some things that your students can do that you can encourage them to use your target language more, And then I'll also talk about the importance of including both explicit and implicit target language use in your classroom. So first thing, I know something that really kind of, gets me is we do a huge amount of methods-based research. And the research states, according to Actful, that language educators and their students use the target language as exclusively as possible, 90% plus at the time, at all levels of instruction during that time, and when feasible, beyond the classroom. But if we take a look at that 90% and actually do the math, for those of you who teach in a traditional schedule, for instance, a 50-minute class, that's almost 47 minutes, I think. Maybe 45. I'm not sure. I'm not the math teacher. I teach on block scheduling, and my classes are 90 minutes long. So that 90% target would be about 81 minutes. It's entirely possible sometimes with those AP classes or upper levels, but sometimes reaching the lower levels for that amount of time, there are some practical considerations that kind of impede that goal. So the first thing I would like you to do, if you have downloaded the link, go ahead and click here. If not, I will go ahead and put the link to this Jamboard in the chat.
Daniel, can you put the link in the chat? I mean
Yep.
Got it. Thank you.
So this will be the Jamboard. Yep, we're going to utilize it before it's taken away at the end of the year. So for here, I have a couple of questions for everybody. And if you haven't used Jamboard before, just a kind of quick crash course, this little portion here, you can grab a sticky note and you can type whatever you'd like into it as your response. So everybody on here, what I'd like you to do, grab a sticky note and answer this question on your screen. Write any and all things that prevent you from maximizing your target language use in your classroom. So when you think, if you are wanting to use your target language more, what is stopping you from doing it? There are certain practical things that do this. Yep. Announcements from the office. I would have to include phone calls from the office right in the middle of giving a lecture. That's a good one. Students kept talking in English after teachers reminded them not to. Yes. Very good. Let's see. What else? What are some other things? Student behaviors. Yes. That is one of the things we will talk about. Flirting. Yep. And with that, it's kind of difficult for me because I'm like, yes, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but timing, my dears, not quite on point. Translating for others, yes. Yep. Beginners and lower level students, yes, it is. It's a balancing act to try to get it for all of those students with them. Different proficiency levels, yes, especially when they happen to be in the same class. Some students are higher ability, others will just be here for the credits. Sometimes we're not up to speed. Sometimes, things happen in daily lives and we're not feeling it. Yes. Giving feedback to our students, it is an important part of our job, and we can't always give them that in the target language because it defeats the purpose. Being clear in the expectations as well, especially when we're setting up our classrooms at the beginning of the year or beginning of the term, it's not always possible. Yes, the motivation question. It's a heavy one with students. Grammar, yes. It's very difficult to teach about the language in the language to language learners. Good, good. Students are used to translating things, yes, or using those electronic translators that they now have access to on a daily basis. Yes. There are a lot of really great suggestions. I'll give you about 1 more minute to put in any last minute ideas for it. Those are all really great responses. And yes, I will be addressing several of them with these. Okay. All of these are actual practical considerations and obstacles for us using the target language as much as possible. One thing further I'd like us to do is to kind of think about where in our classrooms can we use the language and where should we not be in the target language. So on the second page for the Jamboard, another question. What are some situations where you can and probably should use the target language? This can be things like maybe in instructions or possibly when opening the class for the day or doing that first and last 5. What are some situations in the classroom where you can use the target language and where we should be using it as much as possible? Routines, very good. Classroom routines and that kind of, expectation for what's going to happen for the day. Great one. Should have like some Jeopardy music playing in the background while people do their thinking. High frequency class expressions, yes. So things that you're going to hear in a classroom, like, can I go to the bathroom? You can do that in the target language, yes. Doing activities with the students when you give those verbal instructions, yes, that's a great way to do it. Where else can we use the target language? Yes, singing in TBR. Although some of the times I might torture my students with my awful singing voice, but yes, it is a very effective one. Brain breaks. That's a great one. Even when you're taking a break from active learning, you can still use the target language in those, interim 5-10 minutes. That's a good one. Okay. I'll give you about 1 more minute. Trying to think of any other situations where we can and should use the language. Because we look for opportunities where we can put the target language in any way possible. Acknowledging student effort, that is a great one. I was right, muy bien, my assignments. Bonding with heritage learners, yes. In class and around the school, making them feel, included with it and acknowledged outside of the classroom. Very important. Okay, these are all great situations and opportunities for you to include that target language in the classroom. The last slide on the Jamboard, we're going to take a look at some situations where it is not possible and probably detrimental to use the target language. In your classroom, where should you not be using target language? Kind of an odd question for language teachers, but there are certain situations where it's not possible and it shouldn't be used. Like one example, I can go ahead and put this one down. If a student is having a medical issue, or if there is something going on with a 504, that is not something to be, pushing the target language for. That is something that needs to be addressed in the student's language. The first time you do an activity, yes. Anytime there is a behavior problem, that is not something you can address in the target language. Very good. And I like that you put the first time you try a complicated activity. It could be okay later on down the road, once they've gotten comfortable with the rules and the expectations in the activity. But the first time you do it, probably not a good idea. They're all great responses. I know you probably weren't expecting to, have to do some work on Saturday as well. Feedback that needs explanation, yes. Anytime you want to give feedback to a student, while use of the target language can be done, it's more important that the student understands how they can make corrections or improve their language learning, and that is best to do in L1 for the students. We'll go for about 2 more minutes so that we can keep the presentation going. Some situations where you shouldn't or really can't use the target language in your classroom. Any emergency, yes. Whether it's medical, whether there's fire or tornado, you cannot use a second language with that. That has to be done in L1. Very good. When the students are feeling tired and they need a break, yes. And sometimes when the teacher needs a little bit of a break too. Explaining abstract and complicated cultural concepts, yes. Even though for us in Nebraska, one of our standards is culture, some of the times there are certain things that just don't translate, and it is more useful to use L1 with students when explaining these things. Very good. Okay. Clarifying expectations and instructions when there is misunderstanding. Yes. It's not going to help you to re-explain things over and over in the target language if they're not understanding it in the first place. They're all great responses. And yes, these are some practical obstacles that we can't actually include, that we can't actually overcome in a typical classroom, something that the research sometimes does not bring into account. Okay. So with this, back to the big screen. These are all great pieces of feedback, and a lot of these things were covered in your responses to the Jamboard. So one thing that was not brought up was too much curriculum. For some of you, you might be a single room teacher where you can make your own curriculum, but then others of you, you might be tied into a district's expectation of curriculum. And sometimes they prefer quantity over quality, which often makes it difficult to slow down, to really get into the language sufficiently with it. Other things, student attitudes. This is probably one of my biggest ones. Sometimes too much attitude and not enough engagement. And I think we can all agree there are some tools that just belong out in the shed. Another difficulty is it's difficult with the lower levels. Yes, especially with new students and beginners. This is a bit of a challenge with it. It's not impossible though. So if we change our thinking to think it's different with lower levels rather than it's difficult with it, that's one thing to keep in mind. Grammar, the big grammar topic with this. Teaching about the language in the language to language learners. Sometimes not always possible, but there are ways around this one. Something that wasn't brought up, the traveling teacher. This is something I am dealing with my first time ever in my teaching career. I don't have my own classroom. I share classrooms with my entire department. So in the morning, I teach Spanish in the German classroom, and then in the afternoon, I teach it in the French classroom. And you wouldn't believe the amount of times I've had students write the date on their paper, El 8 de janvier. It happens, but there are ways around this as well. So with those obstacles, just keep those in mind. We'll circle back to them towards the end of the presentation, but here are some things that you as the teacher can do to maximize your use in it. And the first thing I do want to point out is mindset is everything. And this is something especially true for me when I first started, because, you know, I knew about ACTFL's 90% in the target language expectation, and I just felt like a failure because I had never reached that aside from, you know, my upper levels. But then as I gained more experience, I realized it's not always possible with some of the practical considerations in the day-to-day. Certainly not with, you know, all the new stuff COVID brought to the game. But I do want to say this. So if you want to say this out loud, you can unmute your mic, or if you want to say it quietly to yourself, you may do so. But just repeat after me. Due to practical considerations, teaching 90% of class time in the target language is not always possible. Here's the big part. And that's okay. It is okay if you don't reach that 90% target, especially with the lower levels. You need to adopt that mindset, okay? You're not a failure as a teacher. We are all good teachers. Heck, we're attending a PD session on a Saturday afternoon or Saturday morning. You know, we're all great teachers, okay? So keep this in mind. The second thing, look back at that ACTFL's recommendation. It says language educators and their students use the target language. That use, it's not specifically to speaking. When we use the language, we read in the target language, we write in the target language, we listen to it, and we absorb, you know, what is being said. So use, that's a very specific and very intentional use of the word with the definition. It does not only refer to how much you speak in the target language. So that is something to keep in mind with it. With that, I do have 6 recommendations for us educators to kind of boost our target language. And I'll just kind of go through each of them in turn. So the first thing, especially, this is something that helps with a lot of your lower levels. It may take some time at the beginning of the term or semester to work in, but the more you integrate the target language into your daily routines and classroom management, the more exposure they're going to have with it. So some examples for this, your opening and your daily closings. At Northwest, we call it our first 5 and last 5. And in my slideshow presentation, everything is written in Spanish. The first couple of weeks, it was kind of rocky, yes, because students didn't understand everything. But now they see it every day. They are expecting it every single day. They know what is being said. It's just taking that time to practice it. Using classroom materials. So whenever you break out the marker boards or, colored pencils with it, identifying those things by their name in the target language, that can be a way as well. Activity and worksheet instructions. Putting some basic instructions on your materials that you hand out to the students. Yes, at the beginning, they're going to struggle with figuring out what it's saying. But if they see it enough and they repeat it enough, it's just going to become ingrained in their brains. Okay. Student redirects. Funny story. I do know how to say shut up in Vietnamese. Because when I was in high school, my history teacher, he was a Vietnam War vet. And anytime we started to get a little bit too rowdy, he would tell us, "Xin loi," shut up in Vietnamese. Am I recommending that you say shut up to your students? No, not necessarily, but If you can include your target language in maybe some of those redirects with, a healthy dose of humor, that could be a way they learn the language, and it does work. Whenever you're giving verbal commands, so anytime those common classroom phrases that we talked about, anytime you're instructing the students to do something, sit up or stand up, sit down, open your computer, put your phones away if you're a high school teacher, those kinds of things. If you're going to say them over and over and over again, that would be good to use the target language. Entering and exiting the classroom procedures. Now, I do have a couple of examples of this, and I will get into these later in the presentation, but things that you maybe greet your students each day, things that you can do, you can say, goodbye, and you can wrap up the class in the target language. These are all opportunities. Transition procedures. There are ways that you can use the target language whenever you transition from one activity to the next, because that's something that you're going to do every single day. And the more often that you do it in the target language, the more used the students will get to it and the more they'll understand it. Okay. When you give your learning objectives, my students, my first year Spanish students, they know the phrase, I can or I will be able to, because I use that every single day. We have a procedure where they read the objective on the board to their partners, and then they negotiate the meaning with that partner. And they've become more familiar with random vocabulary that's not on the current vocabulary list. So these are all different ways in your daily routines that you can include your target language. You don't have to use them all, especially not right away if you haven't done those, but maybe you can think there's a new way that you can integrate the language into your classroom. And I do realize we have a wealth of teaching experience on this meeting. So some of these things, they might seem, a little bit repetitive or that you already know this, but at the same time, it is also kind of good to refresh our memories about some of these basic concepts. The second thing you can do, this kind of goes in with verbal commands and instructions, giving some basic instructions in your target language. So anything that you are going to say to students frequently throughout the term, these can be put into your target language. So for instance, if you want to say take out or put away your textbook, that would be something that you teach the students in the target language. Yes, you will have to teach these phrases, but once they learn them, it will be added into their schema for the target language. And these can be verbal commands, these can be written instructions, like for instance, answer the question or questions. You put that on their worksheets or the things that they have to turn in, and they start to get it. Okay. A good hint with some of these is you can include gestures and have the students practice. So you can do almost kind of like a Simon Says with some of these, like sit down, please. Simon says, sit down, please, in the target language, and they can practice. That's also a really good way to kind of match a verbal command with a physical action, which will deepen the understanding with these. Oh, and I missed one of my things on here. So one of the ones I forgot to do is utilize pictures and gestures. For me, I'm a very visual learner. So sometimes just saying a command or, giving me a verbal instruction, it doesn't always get it. But anytime you can use pictures, gestures, maybe, an auditory sound to go with it, that will help students get more into the language, and that will help them be able to recall much better. One of the other ways is utilizing comprehensible input strategies. I know it seems lately the pendulum is kind of swinging back away from comprehensible input because, using it at that high of frequency for level, again, there's practical considerations that are not always able to do. However, a lot of these things in here, you can adapt them to your own classrooms, like personalized questions, and all of these are linked in the presentation with some explanations on how you do these. But I personally like the movie talk, the one-word images, and the embedded readings. These are really great ways to up the target language usage without a whole lot of work. And two really, really strong proponents of this are Bryce Hedstrom, and Ben Slavic. They have a lot of great resources. They've made numerous publications about use of comprehensible input strategies. And again, I've linked their websites into their names on this one. So if you are interested with that, or want to know more, please take a look at their information. Call and response. This is this very specific activity you can probably use with transitions. It's a way to use up your use of the target language, but also your students as well. So it kind of builds that teacher-student relationship in the classroom, which is so, so important. So the basic premise is the teacher calls out a phrase just to get the student's attention, and the students will respond with another phrase. It's a way to, indicate, yes, we've heard you, yes, we're going to respond to it. A couple of my favorite ones. Presta atención, pay attention. Students can respond with, estamos listos, we're ready. And you can go back and forth to say these as many times as you like to get all of your students to respond with it. But again, making sure you take those first couple of days in your classroom to practice these expectations and to practice these procedures, this will make it much more successful. Another one of my goofy favorites, ¿Qué pasa, calabaza? And how the students respond, nada, nada, limonada. Basically, what's up, pumpkin? The other one's not much lemonade. Makes absolutely no sense. But if you think about the English one, see you later, alligator, after a while, crocodile. We don't know why alligators and crocodiles would associate with each other, but it's a goofy phrase. And the goofier things are, the easier students remember them. So these would be really great in initiating transitions, getting the students' attentions as a group, all of these kinds of things. And it's a way for you to build community in your classroom. The last one, if you are very serious about increasing your target language, this is a technique that I have tried and it has actually worked really well. This is where you can have the students keep you accountable. So something that I do is I have 2 jobs in my classroom that students can volunteer for each day. I have one for a phrase tracker and one for a timekeeper. And the timekeeper, as you can see, they actually track how long I'm speaking in the target language during the class period. Granted, it's not always, accurate because students in attention spans, sometimes they might miss something. But it is a good way for you to kind of keep yourself accountable as well. The other one is the phrase tracker. I have a key phrase of the day. Some of the times I'll keep it for the week, some of the times I'll change it day to day. But it could be something, practicing with grammar or, using some of the target vocabulary for a particular unit. I'll have a key phrase, and the student who's the tracker has to count the number of times I will say that phrase. And something that if you do this, and after you do it for a while, you can kind of see patterns of how often you are using the target language, and you can set goals for yourself to improve upon it. I think right now my time that I'm trying to aim for is at least 30 minutes. I know it's very low with the time frame, but in terms of block scheduling, some of the time, like I said, practical considerations. So I want to be able to speak in 30 minutes total and to say our key phrase at least 15 times. So those are my current goals. But these are all ways that you as the teacher can up your target language. And as we know, the more input students get, the more they are going to acquire the language. The next kind of set are student target language usage. Now, the big barrier to some of these is the student attitudes and student engagement with these, but there are some techniques where even your most resistant learners, they will actually bow down and go ahead and go for it. So there are some ways that I have for you. I have about 4 of them that really work really, really well. First is increasing and integrating more reading and listening activities. Like I said, the definition from actual, it just says language use, not speaking the language. And one of the strongest methods for increasing proficiency in the language is reading activities. If you do it on a regular basis, 2 to 3 times a week, even every day, if you have the time, this will give your students a lot more exposure to the language itself. Now, I know Teachers Discovery has a lot of great readers for specifically French, German, and Spanish. I need to find a good resource for some Chinese readers if we have them in there. But any of you Chinese teachers know of any, please go ahead and drop it in the chat so we can share that resource with it. And you can also couple the reading with listening activities. The listening activities, I have several websites where you can actually download audio files from authentic speakers. So it's not just that pre-prescribed textbook recording of "Hola, ¿cómo te llamas?" No, these are actual speakers with different dialects and different accents and using vernacular that is specific to their region of the world. The second one, this is kind of a fun one, passwords. This any idea that you think, wow, that's a really good one, I have stolen from another teacher. This one is actually something that was introduced to me by Angie Wagner. She is the Spanish teacher out in Crete High School. She's an AP teacher and the Spanish Honor Society co-sponsor. The concept of a password is the students will say a phrase in the target language to the teacher when they get to class. And off to the right, this is an example of kind of one of my second to last closing slides. So the little phrases up at the top, that's kind of a back and forth I do with the students. It's just repeated, over and over so that the students get engaged with it. The phrase in yellow, that's the password that they have to tell me the next day. So before they come into the classroom, yo tengo el pelo, they have to tell me something about their hair, either the length, texture, color, what have you. And I will tell you, this technique, even my most reluctant, stubborn language learners, they will do this for you. If you hold them accountable to it, this is a way to connect with 100% of your students. And the great thing about this is not only does it give them a chance to use the target language, it gives you a chance to kind of check in with every single student that comes into your classroom, okay? Just with that short little interaction, you can tell, oh, this student is not having a good day. There's something wrong. Or, hey, this student is super excited to be here. Plus, it's kind of fun when the students, get the password on the first try and like, yeah, I'm so smart in this language. Woohoo! It just kind of builds you up. Passwords are my absolute favorite student use for it. Another technique, this is kind of a very specific one, where you kind of put it on the students to work together and use materials in the target language. This example here, this is kind of a mini conversation circle with some response cards with it. So something that I do is I have a set of questions that are specific to this unit. By the way, I got this idea just a couple of weeks ago from my tenure class at LPS, and I'm shamelessly promoting it here. But you have a question set, and you put students together in groups of 3 to 4. And this graphic here, I print out these on cardstock, and I give each group one of these. Each person is assigned a number, and that's what they have to start with. That's their task in the group. This is the way you hold everybody accountable for it. And then as they go through the questions, you rotate this card. So the person who was 1, they become either 2 or 4. Person who was 4, they go on to the next number, and so on and so forth. So this uses material in the target language. So escoja, pick, contesta, answer, responde, respond. But then it also gets them talking in the target language. And it keeps you out of it because sometimes, especially with those lower levels, they feel more confident talking to their peers than they do the teacher itself. So this is one technique I really enjoy with them. And the last room, classroom cash. In my classroom, students have the opportunity to earn euros, and there are some specific outlines for it. This is a way for them to increase their speaking abilities with the target language, because with my students, I tend to find that speaking is probably the most nerve-wracking, most difficult skill to kind of encourage with students. But this is a technique I really, really like. So the basic premise of it is I print out paper copies of euros, not actual ones, but they can get the gist of it. Other teachers I've seen, they use pesos. You can use francs. You can use, whichever currency that you wish to have. And each time a student uses the target language without prompting, they can earn classroom cash. Sometimes they can do, I include competitions. The team that shows the most proficiency with the current language that we're studying or the current unit, they earn their euros. And they have the chance to purchase some semi-fabulous prizes, which I put my examples over to the side. So, maybe they earn €5, they can purchase a sticker, 10, a pencil. 25 euros, I will actually go out and buy their favorite snack for them. You don't have to do that, but that is something, little bag of chips I can get them, makes them happy. But then they can get into some of the higher earning in terms of removing a missing assignment from the grade book. Now, I know there's some districts or, schools that might be questioning this, but the way I've explained it is they earn this cash by demonstrating their learning, by using the target language. So they're essentially making up that missing work by demonstrating it in other ways. So that could be something that you could consider. And even with this is a way to get students using it outside of the classroom. I've had students yell at me down the hallway, "Hola maestra, ¿cómo estás?" All right, I know, I'll get your euro, muy bien. So that's a way to kind of, expand the language beyond your classroom walls. And the last thing I want to talk about is explicit versus implicit target language use, okay? So not all language learning, it needs to be active or it needs to be work. The key is to combine both of them. Now, the explicit language use, that is something that aids in language learning, putting the effort in, practicing with those skills and, integrating it into your schema. But then the more subtle language acquisition, that can happen with implicit use of the language. Things that maybe you don't actively teach them in the classroom, but maybe they see it up on one of your displays or on the wall. Or maybe they are looking at, one of their assignments and they see an advertisement in the back of one of the pictures in there. That could be a way for them to acquire the language itself. Okay. And I have these examples here, and I put the quote from, I believe it's Crashing up there. Learning or acquisition of a language will take place with an abundance of input. And giving your students that input, it doesn't always have to be fed to them. You can just have it in your classroom and they can use it to their own advantage. So for instance, labeling things in your room. So if you are not a traveling teacher, maybe some of you have already done this, like put a note under the clock and say, what is this in the target language? Or under the window, or in this case, the chat, the cat in there. If you're a traveling teacher, this is much more difficult, but it is still possible. This here, it's a Bitmoji background for a digital classroom. So if you have to travel, from room to room or from, hopefully not, school to school, you can create your own digital space, and having those labels up where students can see them every single day, they'll slowly start to acquire what those words mean, okay? So the more often they see them, the more likely they'll get them. One of the things I love, and I'm disappointed I haven't been able to do, is creating a word wall. Now, what I like to do is I have these bubbles in multiple different colors, and they include the 100 most common words in Spanish, and I post them in kind of a cluster around the room. Usually I like to put it by the door because if students try to line up early before they leave class, at least they're surrounded by Spanish and they can take some time and look, tango means I have. I seem to remember this from this unit. So word walls are a great way for implicit language learning. And these are some actual kinds of copies of it. They can be specific words, they can be specific phrases. The key is looking for the highest frequency words and phrases that you can to post on those walls, because that's the way students will acquire the useful information to, survive in any kind of a language. If you don't have your own classroom, you can also utilize digital word walls. Two apps that are really great for this are Padlet or Linoit, and I've put the links in there if you wish to create your own kind of word wall. These can be added to and displayed on your classroom learning management system so that students can have it on a daily basis, or if you can figure out how to put them as your background, that's the way to go. Other ones, using more cognates. Now I know some schools and districts, they kind of get tied into the curriculum and you do have to kind of teach specific concepts. But anytime you can use a cognate for a word, do so. For instance, in Spanish, there are actually two words for computer. There's computadora and ordenador. Granted, ordenador is very common in Spain and parts of Argentina, but computadora, if you look at the word, you know it means computer. It's very obvious that it looks like it. So if there are words on the list of vocabulary that you teach your students that you can make easier for them by using a true cognate, do as much as you can with that, because it'll lower the working memory load for students, and they'll be able to focus more of their energies on some of those more difficult words and concepts. Okay. The other one is using as many digital resources as you can. All of these are linked on here for extra reading and listening practice. And they have a bunch of different downloadable files or recordings that you can integrate into your classroom. A couple of my favorites are Audiolingua. This one, I just got to show you this one. It's such a cool site. But what it is, it's originally a French site, but it has audio recordings from all of these languages in here. And you can choose your topic or whatever theme you want with them. So you can also choose, let's see, look up Spanish here. All of the recordings, they're listed by their proficiency level with this A1, A2, B1, B2. You also have time frames for each of these recordings. It can be, a guy speaking versus a girl speaking. It can be an adult versus a child. And these audios, you can adjust their playback speed, making it faster, slower, whatever you need to. You can download it and put these into your learning management system. This is one of my favorite websites, and I always have to include it anytime I do a presentation with these. So if you need more resources than maybe what your district or your curriculum materials offer, these are all really, really great websites to check out. Another one, the last one for this one, is reuse and recycle activities. A lot of us already do this, especially if you teach multiple levels, but the idea is, it's that I+1, taking what you have originally and adding on to it the next time the student sees it. That familiarity with material or with target language activities and material, it decreases affective filter, so students aren't necessarily nervous about learning something new. They're just like, oh, we're kind of learning something again and adding some more information to it. Some of the ways you can do this, I have a presentation where I talk about spiraling curriculum. This is very useful if you are a one teacher per school language teacher, where you can reuse and recycle as many activities as you need to sufficiently teach the material for your students. Other examples would be embedded readings. there is a link a couple of slides back where you take a basic text and each time the students are exposed to it, you expand upon it. You add more details, adding more information. While that familiarity with the main topic of the reading stays the same, you add in those extra details so that students can build on top of their knowledge base. And you can use activities and materials as review for upper levels. So any new activity you give to your level 1s, use it as review for your level 2s or even level 3s and beyond with those. So it's not one of those one and done kinds of things and you have to constantly reinvent the wheel. Reuse those activities. They are very useful. And trust me, students don't get bored of them. So to kind of wrap things up before we open it up to questions, you have access to all these different resources and these different ideas. Let's go back and take a look at some of those obstacles. So for a couple of these with student attitudes, these are some ideas that were thrown out there that kind of work around that obstacle. So using passwords, getting students involved in keeping you accountable as the teacher, those classroom cache ideas, conversation mini circles, activities that they can do without, teacher intervention and work with their peers, and adjusting vocab to include more cognates, because sometimes in attitudes it's based on thinking something is too difficult and not wanting to do it. These are some great activities that can kind of overcome that obstacle of student attitudes. If you have too much curriculum, relying on some of those more implicit language acquisition techniques would be really useful. Using word walls, working hard to integrate the target language into your daily routines, more pictures, gestures, reading and listening activities, reusing and recycling activities each year or within each unit. So maybe you used an activity from unit 1, you can use the same activity for unit 6 or unit 5, whatever you want to. And utilizing more of those digital resources comes in really handy. If one of your obstacles is grammar, again, some of these like the daily key phrases, you can say something using a grammatical concept or structure so that the students become more familiar with it. Marrying some of those phrases with pictures and gestures, utilizing CI techniques and activities, that will kind of help marry some of those more difficult grammar concepts in there. Will you always be able to use target language with grammar? Maybe not. But with these, you might be able to use more of it when you teach it rather than none at all. And if you have lower level students, believe it or not, a lot of these activities work really well for them. And if you're a traveling teacher, maybe not my word walls because I love them so much. But like I said, there are digital ways that you can do that. So let's open it up for questions or any comments for that. And if you want, you can put the questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, please feel free to do so.
I think there's one question before in the chat.
Oops. Explaining more about the response cards and mini conversation circles. Oh, yes, I apologize. I tried to put too much information on one of those slides in here. So using Spanglish in the instructions or Fringlish, Chinenglish, that would also work. So mixing in your languages with your instructions, that is a great way to do it. For the conversation cards, here it is. It's actually a very, very specific example. So the card that you see here on the front, this is just kind of it's a classroom tool that I print out on cardstock and give to the students and laminate them. So in section 1, the first role is the person will have the cards and they fan them out. So they just That's all they have to do. They just have to hold the cards in a little fan for person two to pick the card and read the question out. So, and these main titles are in Spanish. So, abanica, fan things out. Escoja, choose a card. The person who chooses the card will have to read the question to the person in role 3. And role 3 is the one who actually answers the question. So let's say it's one of the basic questions, ¿Qué te gusta hacer? What do you like to do? The person in role 3 would have to first take some time, think about how you would answer that. Then they would say, a mí me gusta comer en la clase. I know this is something my students do all the time. I like to eat in the classroom. The person in position 4, they would be able to give a response to that question. Now, if it's with position 4, I don't necessarily need them to use the target language. This could be something where if person 3 gave maybe an incorrect answer, person 4 can give them feedback. Like, let's say they use the lovely yo me gusta. Person 4 would say, well, actually it's a mí me gusta. So they could give some corrective feedback to their peer, which sometimes works a lot better than, the teacher giving it. Or perhaps the person in 4 could maybe ask a follow-up question, like, well, what do you like to eat in class? Or, oh, I like to eat in class too. I'm especially, fond of those Oreo cakes, something like that. And then this card, this physical card, the students would ideally sit in a circle or in a square. They would rotate the card so that the roles would change with each person. Now, there are certain other ones like response cards where maybe this is a whole class activity where you're asking true or false to the students, and the students would take the card, the physical card, and hold it up. It's one of those opportunities to respond where they don't necessarily have to say anything, or do a whole lot of work. They just have to hold a card up. So they want to engage with it. And you can put those cards in the target language, cierto, falso. Or it can be, a multiple choice where you have opción A, opción B, option A, option B, those kinds of things. So the response cards, they can be used in several different contexts depending on your activity. And the mini conversation circles, it's kind of a build off of a larger conversation circle, or the inner and outer circles activities that some people do, where you have an inside circle of students who have a question, and students on the outside circle will have to answer it. And then, the circles rotate in different directions, so you have different partners in there. This particular example, the response cards and the mini conversation circles, it's a very specific example of an activity with it. Yes, we do have access to this PowerPoint. On the beginning, let's see.
Oh, I put the link again. I share the link.
Oh, for the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, yep. And all of the links in this presentation, they will take you to some more in-depth resources than I was able to have here. You absolutely will be able to have this presentation. And like I said, we're all experienced teachers here. We're doing a PD session on a Saturday morning, but knowing that some of these techniques, these are going to help you, or that if you're already doing them, that these are great ways to integrate it. And remembering that using the language is not just speaking, it's about all of those skills with it.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
Thank you for answering my question for the mini conversation circles. I heard you mention we can use this for a whole classroom activity for true or false. Can you give an example how to do that? True and false.
Yes. So this one, if you want to use for like a true or false activity, it may require modifying a reading activity or creating the material on your own. But one example I can give is in my Spanish ones, we're talking about physical and personality descriptions. So one example could be you can make a presentation with a bunch of different celebrities, and then you can have a statement above each person's picture. So for instance, we can have one big name on tip of my tongue, Taylor Swift. You can have a picture of Taylor Swift and then a phrase above her picture, something that says like, ella tiene el pelo castaño. She has dark hair. So the students would be able to read that statement, take their card and either hold up cierto or falso. So that way, they wouldn't necessarily have to worry about saying the incorrect answer. They would be able to just hold up the card with it. And the card itself, you could put in the target language. You could put cierto or falso, true or false, in there so that the students would actually be able to read it and have it in their hands and see it, but use it at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
And at the end of this presentation, I'll tack on a copy of like a true and false card or an ABC card, so that if you wish to download it and make a copy for yourself, you can do so. The AB schedule. I remember those. Operates on an AB schedule and class considered a specialty or maybe an elective, maybe not one of the core ones. Class is 46 minutes. Any recommendations for activities outside of class to encourage students to use target language in these gaps? With that kind of a situation, utilizing digital resources would be a great way to do this. I don't know if your students have access to Google Classroom or a learning management system. One great way to do it is I like to put short little YouTube videos with people speaking in Spanish. One of my favorite ones is Easy Spanish. With those, I will put links up in my Google Classroom each week so that students can look on those videos. Another great way to do it is giving your students real world homework. This is a technique I saw many years ago where in order to earn their grade in class, they have to do something outside of the class with the target language. So for instance, if you live in a very heavily multicultural city, maybe the students have to see a work of art from the target culture and then, cross that off their bingo card. Or perhaps they have to go to a restaurant from that target culture, maybe snap a picture of the menu or, describe the food that they had with their. So those are ways, if you only see your students a few times a week, that could be a way for them to kind of bridge that gap when they're not in your classroom. So real world homework ideas and utilizing digital resources would help. That's a great question. My question slide open. Yes, you are doing the right thing so far. If you've done these techniques or, have already integrated them, you are on the right track.
Thank you, Danielle. This is awesome. If you have put your name and email in a chat or private messaged me, you already got your PD certificate. If there are any problems or in your city, last time we had a problem, please let me know. I'm happy to fix it.
There is one additional thing I would like to share with you folks. If you have heard of the OER Commons, this is kind of a depository of online free resources that you can access and utilize. Oh, don't give me that. That you can utilize in your classrooms. And the Nebraska International Languages Association has a hub where we will upload different presentations from different PD sessions and from our yearly conference. So if you are interested about, having access to this particular presentation, it will be posted on this website, the OER Open Educational Resources Commons. And I'll go ahead and drop this in the chat for you, if you wish to take a look. But we have a Nebraska International Languages group, as you can see here. And this presentation will be uploaded to this site shortly as well. And here we also have a bunch of different world language resources from all different languages. So if you are looking for more ideas or more digital resources, this is one place where you can definitely go to find them.
Yeah, this is awesome. Yeah. You already started your own OER hub. That's awesome.
Yep, and we're going to try to get presentations from some of our past conferences uploaded on there. So if people were not able to attend the conferences, they would at least be able to get the benefit of, those PD sessions.
Any other questions? If no, I think let's call it a day and we can enjoy our Lunar New Year. Thanks for joining us, and I really appreciate, everybody's passion about learning, about teaching. Yeah. Thank you very much.